Welcome to the Savvy Dentist podcast with Dr. Jesse Green, the show where great dentistry meets great business. Listen in each week as we bring you an inspiring person who will share their story, ideas and business techniques to help you create a practice and a life you love. And now introducing your host, Dr. Jesse Green.
Hello everyone, it's Jesse Green here. Welcome back to SavvyDentist.com and to the Savvy Dentist podcast. Wonderful to have your company as always. And today we're going to be talking all about the gap between being excellent and being an elite performer in your field. And my guest today is Craig Johns, and he's coming with a sporting background, not just his own sporting background, but having coached other high-performance athletes. Craig himself is a triathlete and has represented New Zealand in triathlon and is also a competitive hockey player as well. But specifically, he's had a lot of experience coaching other high performers, swimmers and the like, to help them achieve their own sporting goals. He's been involved in the administration of sports at an elite level as well, and is now currently involved with triathlon in the ACT here in Canberra. Craig is an incredible coach. He's able to see potential and to help people fulfill their potential, so he knows the difference between being excellent and really talented and then achieving at an elite level. And specifically, he knows how to take that journey and what steps are involved in that. So in our conversation today, we unpack that. We look at the steps that are going to be relevant for you in your dental practice. And there's a ton of really good stuff here that I know if you apply in your practice is going to help you achieve extraordinary results in your practice too. So without any further ado, here's Craig Johns. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Craig Johns, welcome to the Savvy Dentist podcast. It's great to have you here, mate. Another Canberran in the hood. It's good to have a fellow ACT person. Welcome.
Thanks, Jesse. Yeah, it's great to be on the podcast and looking forward to a great conversation today.
Yeah, I can't wait, mate. So we're going to cover a lot of territory and lots of things that I'd like to dive into because you've got an incredible pedigree and a really interesting background in high-performance sport. And, of course, you've made that crossover into business as well and looking at how those things translate. Before we do get into the meat and potatoes of that conversation, I'm curious to ask you about your background because I know you've got a background in elite sports yourself, but you've also had a background in the management of elite sports. And I'm just wondering from a contextual piece whether we can let the listeners know a bit about how you arrived at this point.
Yeah, thanks. Look, I grew up in New Zealand on a farm. Both my mum and dad's side of the family were off farm, so they tended to work hard. They were used to being out there long hours, very driven to succeed in what they were doing as well, and come from a real servant heart. So my mum was a nurse. My dad was a coach. He spent a lot of time in volunteer sports space, and it was the same on mum's side of the family as well. So I kind of grew up in sport, in serving people and helping people and trying to make a difference as well. So it's always kind of been there. As a child, from before I even got to school, I wanted to play every sport there possibly was. And I didn't just want to turn up, I wanted to win every single time. And it wasn't like a ruthless win. It was like I was so focused on trying to improve every single time and ensuring that the best performance came out. And it was just evident from an early childhood. And so the sports that kind of really connected with me or I found myself in most of the time were field hockey and triathlon, where I was able to go up into New Zealand representative teams, which is kind of interesting, right? One's a real power, skill, team-based sport. The other one's endurance. And if I actually look at my body type, I was actually more suited to power. So I probably should have been a track cyclist or something similar to that, which would have really suited who I was. But for some reason, this endurance bug got me, and I stayed in triathlon for quite a long time. Along the way, I sort of found myself in coaching roles and actually started paid coaching in swimming at the age of 15, and just really, really loved that. I love being able to draw out just the fine aspects out of people and just help them improve every single time. There was something about helping other people achieve something. And so I had this great combination of focusing on myself, but also being able to focus on other people. And I think that has really helped me from a leadership point of view long-term in my career as well. In field hockey, we had I was part of an amazing team. 5,000 people lived in this area. Most of them were farmers. We had a couple of people who were engineers and, maybe a bank teller. And actually we had someone in that team that worked in the morgue. And so that was probably kind of the odd one out in that team.
Yeah.
And we had a team of people that came together I made that senior team as a 13-year-old, so probably the youngest that's ever played for that team. I never lost a game in 5 years playing with them. And they actually went on to, they went unbeaten for nearly 270 games, I think it is. And it's a record in New Zealand for the longest winning streak of any sports team.
Wow.
And it's really interesting because no one actually knows the exact number. Like for them, it wasn't about how many wins we got. It was just around how do we perform every time. And it wasn't so much around how do we beat the other team. It was how could we improve the game? And it's kind of like the All Blacks in a way. The All Blacks are always going out there they're looking at how they can improve the game of rugby, whereas all their rivals are like, how do we beat New Zealand? How do we beat the All Blacks? And the same thing was happening. And even at times where, you should have 11 players on the field for field hockey, we had times we only had 10, but we still could win. And it didn't matter how we were feeling or how much pressure the other team put on us. We always found a way to win. And we always knew how to do that together. So there was no one who stood out in the team as being an I. It was all about we and how we progressed from there. And so you had that, whereas triathlon, you can have 4,000 people in the race and only one person's going to win. It's a very different mindset. I was used to winning every single time, but then in triathlon, sure, I won some races, but the chance of winning every time was not 50-50.
Yeah.
It was one in a lot of people. And so those mindsets you had to switch between as an athlete, I found really, really fascinating. From there, I went on to continue, coaching, and I had to actually stop sport for about 4 years. I had a pacemaker put in. I had heart problems at the age of 20. So I really focused then on coaching and also sports science, where I got to work with a number of Olympic teams, America's Cup, and some professional teams in New Zealand through that period before I ended up overseas, where I went back to elite sport again and won a couple of national titles in mountain biking and triathlon and duathlon, and found myself in roles by the end where I was actually going into sport management and leadership, and the reason I did that, the reason I stepped away from high performance was in high performance, you get to work with a very select few people. And it's great. It's fascinating. But for me, I have always had this deep burning desire. How do I help people be happier, healthier, and hungrier for success?
Okay. Well, that's really interesting. So let's talk about some of that in a moment, because I think there's a lot that we can get through. Obviously, your background has led you to this point, which is around all manner of different high performance environments. So I wanted to ask you a couple of things around that, because I think there'll be some parallels and some lessons there that you've taken from your experience that will be relevant and pertinent to our audience as well. So I wanted to ask you, making the New Zealand team for hockey, and by the way, thank you for introducing the All Blacks topic so early into our conversation that for us here in Australia, it's just a great source of pain. But anyway, we'll move on from that. But what I want to
talk about underarm bowling.
Yeah. It's all right. We can talk about everything you like, including sheep. But anyway, I'm joking. I am kidding. We love our Kiwi cousins and they love us just as much. But I do want to seriously talk about representing your country, because I would imagine that was obviously an incredible honour to represent New Zealand. There really is no higher honour than representing your country, and you've done that. And to reach that pinnacle, there's obviously a difference between excellent and elite. And I want to explore the difference or the gap that exists between excellent and elite. So I wondered if for a moment you could reflect on some observations around that gap and what you see as the difference.
Yeah, great question. High performance is high performance. So it doesn't matter what you do in life, the same basic fundamentals apply. And if you want to be successful at something, and we see this we see it in both the great, but then you see it to even a more degree with those that achieve, really high success, like a Michael Phelps or someone like that. And that is, they have absolute focus on and clarity on their vision and what they're trying to achieve. Absolute clarity. And what happens when you have absolute clarity on your vision, so what your goal is, what you're trying to achieve, you learn to start to say no. And no becomes natural. And what you're doing is say no to all the distractions and other things that don't help you get to where you want to go. Those who don't have clarity in life or clarity as a sports person will say yes to lots of things, and they're never focused enough on what they need to do to actually achieve it. I think that's probably one of the biggest things. The second really important thing is they are prepared to do the monotonous things, the basics, over and over and over and over again. They repeat the things that a lot of people get bored of and don't like. But they are the things that actually make them the best at what they do. Someone like I was listening to a great interview with Michael Phelps on the Tim Ferriss show the other day, and it had Grant Hackett on there as well. Great conversation that went quite deep. And when you listen to both of them, they just focused on what was it that could make them go 0.001 of a second faster in every single training session. So they have this deep burning desire to just make those small adjustments, but keep practicing the basics in what they do.
I really want to say thank you for introducing that, because there's a few things there, a few threads I'd like to pick up on. And it's interesting, Michael Phelps has come up in a couple of conversations recently. And I heard someone say that the best way to lose a race is to look at what your competitor is doing. And I guess, coming back to what you said earlier, is we weren't focused on winning, we were focused on being better. We were focused not on the competition, we were focused on our own game and improving. And to pick up the conversation that you've just had with Michael Phelps and Grant Hackett, is they were focused on how can they be their best, and the ability to say no, I guess, was also not really focusing so much on other people's race, but focusing very clearly on their vision, their outcome, their goals, and then having the discipline and the tenacity and the patience to consistently execute and improve upon those fundamentals. Is that essentially what you're saying?
Yeah, it's 100%. And it is, how can they improve everything, every aspect in their life to put them in that focus? Now, that's a real hyper focus, and there's obviously some negative aspects to that as well. And when you look at what made them so great, they also have a number of flaws, which, have meant at certain times they've done things they're not proud of, or they tend to compartmentalize. Actually, this is something that a lot of athletes will do. They will compartmentalize things. They will take things, and I see it with CEOs as well, things that aren't going to help them get to where they want to go, but are actually having an effect on them. What they'll do is they'll take it, they'll put it in a compartment in their brain, and they will leave it there and for a later date. And what that does is it still sits there. It's still a bit of pressure and it's still stress, but it just sits there. So they move things away. And so, yes, it's good at the time because they can just then focus and things are moved out of the way, but they're not so good at going back to actually attend to those things, which could be a relationship, which could be other matters in their life that are really important long term. And
we saw that with Tiger Woods, right? And again, not here to discuss his personal life per se, but such an elite performer, obviously incredible golfer, winning everything. And then obviously those little things that weren't attended to exploded. And we'll talk about, because I know you do a lot of work in that space around pressure, and you've got that model around atomic pressure, but obviously things exploded, and then it had an impact on his performance. So I guess pressure comes in all different forms. But before we get to that part of the conversation, I just want to finish exploring this part, which is when you are so hyper-focused, and you're saying no to everything, I guess it's understanding the trade-off that you're making and making that trade-off consciously, so that you're choosing to say, for the moment, I'm pursuing this version of success, and I know that I may need to make a compromise in another element of my life so that I can achieve that. I wanted to ask you, do you think, is that the necessary part of high performance at the elite level? Is that the gap between excellent and elite right there?
Yeah, it's making those choices, right? For them, it's not a sacrifice, it's a choice.
Yeah.
and it's reframing it. A lot of people go, oh, I sacrificed this. I sacrificed not going to the pub with my mates, or I sacrificed not having a boyfriend or girlfriend. I sacrificed time with my family.
Sure.
No, they made a choice.
Yeah.
They chose to do that. So it's a conscious decision to make a choice to do something.
Yeah.
When you talk about the gap between the great and the elite, and there's one other aspect in there, and it comes down to genetics.
Yeah.
If you look at, say, someone like an Ian Thorpe, he had size 17 feet. It wasn't the actual size of his feet that was impressive to me. It was how fast he could turn those feet over. That was more impressive. So normally when we talk in swimming, we talk about having a 6-beat kick. So that's 6 kicks per stroke, or per arm stroke. Now, if you watched Ian Thorpe in his prime, he could get up to 12 kicks per stroke in the final 50 meters of a 400. Now, a lot of long-distance swimmers at that time were only doing a 2 or 4-beat kick. But he could somehow find a way to those massive long fins. He could turn them up to a 12-beat kick. That was something impressive. That's a God-given talent. That's not something you can really manufacture as an athlete. I can't go from a size 9 to a size 16 feet.
No.
And the ability to turn my feet over at 12 kicks per stroke, I tried as hard as I could, but I couldn't get anywhere near it.
Yeah, got it. So, okay, well, let's talk about the pressure piece, because obviously the elite performers face pressure. The elite performers have a way of managing pressure. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, performing under pressure, because again, I watch a lot of sports. I've got a daughter who's interested in gymnastics, and I know that she's got some talent, and from time to time, the pressure will get to her. And I suspect that happens to most, but how do you manage to perform in a pressure type environment? What are your observations from your own sporting career? But again, from your coaching and other things, what have you noticed?
So the first thing is pressure is a choice. So whether it's internal or external, it's the decisions we make based on the situation or based on something that's there. So we can either choose for it to become pressure or choose for it not to be pressure.
So tell me more. Can you just elaborate on that? Because that's a paradigm that I think some people might find a little bit different or just new.
Yeah. So for instance, if I, went down to the local pool and I stood up on the start block and Michael Phelps turned up and stood up on the start block next to me, I can choose for that to be a lot of pressure or be no pressure. I have the full control over whether that's going to affect my ability to perform at my best. I may not beat him, but my ability to perform at my best will be decided on how I choose to react or act to what has just occurred there. So when someone gives you a deadline in the office, you can choose for that to become a high-pressure situation where you create anxiety and stress upon yourself to get that delivered, versus you can create a low or medium pressure situation where you go, okay, all I need to do is do this step first, this step next, and you break it down. So you simplify things. Pressure situations require simplicity, and simplicity requires courage. It's very, very easy to make something complex in the world. Very easy. It's the easiest thing in the world to do is make something complex. The hardest thing is to simplify something. And if you want to perform well when there might be a perceived pressure, especially external pressure, then you need to simplify things. If you feel your internal pressure building up, you need to simplify things back to, okay, what can I control first? Let's control those, keep them simple, and then work through things step by step.
Yeah, again, thank you for bringing that. Ladies and gents, if you've just tuned in, we're talking to Craig Johns about high performance and how to deal with pressure in those sorts of situations. And to go back to your metaphor of you standing on the swimming blocks and Michael Phelps rocks on up next to you and you can choose whether or not that affects your performance, I guess it also comes back to how you're measuring your success, isn't it? Yeah, if you were to measure your success as, I'm going to beat Michael Phelps, then that's probably setting you up for a tough time. And I'm not throwing your swimming abilities into doubt as I say that. But equally, if your measure of success is I'm going to go and swim the best race I can and maybe do a PB, then that's a victory for me. So I guess it's really important then to define what success is in any given environment. So do you have any thoughts around that? I think I suspect I know you're thinking because you've spoken about the hockey and so on, but just if we can articulate and elaborate on that a little bit, about being clear about what success is and how that plays a role in performance.
And look, yes, you could define success in many ways. And generally those who define stress as materialistic are the ones that either end up with high pressure because their anxiety builds up, because they're just striving. The gap is so big and they're trying to figure out how to jump across the Grand Canyon rather than a creek. Versus those that are going to look at that goal or that outcome is so far away that they just give up because it's like, oh, there's no way I can do this. It's just all too consuming. So they actually end up in an apathy state of really, really low pressure because they're just like, I give up. So they take all the pressure away and have no pressure, which they're not going to perform at as well. Then they stop trying.
Yeah.
And so it's finding that balance in between where you can look at how do you, and you'll quite often hear around people talking about the 1%ers or the 0.01% type thing. It is how can you make those marginal gains? Now that's something that's talked about a lot. Those marginal gains still need some pressure. Like you still need to go, okay, like how do I improve this? So there still needs to be some pressure because you need to feel alert and you need to want it. So if there's no pressure, then you're not alert to the situation. So you're not aware of whether you are actually improving or not. So it's finding that balance in the middle there.
All right, well, let's just shift gear for a moment because I want to come back to the triathlon versus hockey, which you spoke about a moment ago. And you said that, by your own DNA or body shape, body mass, you're probably more suited for those power type of activities. And yet there you are in a type of environment that may or may not be suited to your natural build. But in hockey, you've got a team of individuals, all sorts of builds, all sorts of different abilities, all sorts of different things. And yeah, I've got a background as a kid in rowing, and I remember explaining this metaphor many times in podcasts or webinars, is that when things come together, there's a harmony, there's a flow, you feel it, but as soon as you try to think about it, you lose it kind of routine. There's this, it's just being in flow, that flow state. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, not just elite performance on an individual level, but elite performance at a team level. And how do you communicate? How do you act? Obviously, there's the commonality of purpose, the shared vision, all those other sorts of things. But how do you create that flow state? Or is it just something mythical and magical that comes along from time to time? Or can it be manufactured?
Really, really good question. And obviously, when you bring a group of people together, a diverse group of people together to try and perform and ensure that the end result is something, as you say, it is flow, it is magical, is a big challenge. And there's not you even see the best teams in the world where they bring, they try and buy the best players they possibly can. Doesn't always work, right? And quite often it doesn't. It's generally a team that's not quite as talented that just have faith in each other. It's around building trust in each other that if say for hockey, right? So if I'm heading this direction, I know that you're going to be moving into another direction. So I can pass the ball to you and know that you're going to make the right decision to pass to whoever you need to, rather than trying to be the hero and trying to score by yourself. So it's, and trust it's built in many different ways. And obviously there's a lot of talk around, vulnerability and building trust that way. But there's also a lot of trust built by having fun, like enjoying the people that you're with, and having people that to them, it doesn't matter where you're currently at. What matters to them is that you want to improve to the next level. And if you're willing to do that, people will start to trust you because they know that you're on a journey. And the journey's in the right direction. It's not a journey that's going behind you. It's a journey that's going forward. And they then want to help you grow, because if you grow, then the whole team grows in that performance. And so that was probably one of the things that I noticed. And it's hard because we look back at this team and we never spoke about at the time around how do we go and win 270 games in a row. That was never, ever spoken. It was never really spoken around how are we going to win this year's championship. It was just around how are we going to improve? How are we going to be a better team? How are we going to actually grow the sport and evolve it?
And look, interestingly enough, I know I'm going to tread where Australians fear to tread, and that is in the All Black territory, because clearly they are one of the most successful sporting teams in the international arena, if not the most successful sporting team. And I was reading James Kerr's book called Legacy, which he talks a lot about culture. He talks a lot about respect for the jersey. He talks about a lot of different things that create that winning culture. But it's interesting to me, the concept of enduring success rather than fleeting success or momentary success. And what you've spoken about with your hockey team in the 270 games, and what we've certainly observed with the All Blacks, is that enduring success. Is there anything that speaks to the enduring success rather than the I won the premiership this year, but next year I'm going to be back in the middle of the field kind of success?
I think when we look at the All Blacks, and I think this is it's well known that they are over a long period of time the most successful sports team in the world that's playing on a consistent basis.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating because the coaches have changed, the players have changed over 100 years, but they continue to grow and evolve. Yes, they have times when they lose, but they're able to pick themselves up and keep moving. One of the things that I think is really fascinating in that, and I think it's very consistent to what we had in the field hockey team as well, and is the jersey is not yours to own. You're just lucky to hold that jersey for a short period of time, and your job is to leave it in a better place than where you found it. That's all they ask for. You leave the jersey in a better place than you found it. And I think that for us, that was the same thing with our field hockey team. That it was something that we wanted to make sure that that jersey was left in a better place, and that when someone else came into the team, they could pick up on something and take it to the next level. And we weren't afraid of that. We weren't there to go, okay, we set the record, no one else is as good as us. And it was never about that. It was about how do we ensure we leave a continuing legacy? And obviously that's the name of James Kerr's book. And for those who haven't read it, I'd highly recommend it for success in anything in life. Yeah, I think that's my feeling on it.
And I guess to take that into the business world, if for someone in a role, I guess what we're really asking them to do is to leave that position better than they found it. We understand in dentistry that we're probably not going to have our team members from today until they're hitting retirement. We know that people will come and go through our practices, and that's, part of the journey, part of the story. But I guess the big thing then is to make sure, okay, this is what the role looks like now. Let's make sure that when you exit and go on to your next adventure, that the role is better than it was before, and we've left it, so someone can pick up, to really kind of overuse the metaphor, to pick up the ball and run with it and go from there.
Yeah, I think so as well. And look, it's interesting when you start there are a lot of similarities between sport, between military, and between leadership and owning a business.
Yeah.
The biggest difference in sport compared to business is in sport, you know exactly where you stand in the pecking order in the world or in your area. You know exactly where you stand. To determine whether you're a better dentistry business than the one down the road or the one in Africa or a one in New York, how can you identify that?
Yeah. Interesting you talk about that as well, because you'd know Rick Charlesworth, and he's, for those that don't know, a well-known hockey coach here in Australia and coached the national side for years, and I think he's from Western Australia originally. But he's also known to pick up that point as well. His other observation is that in sport, you'll practice and practice and practice and then compete on the weekend, in inverted commas and air quotes. Whereas in business, you're competing almost all the time. You're on the field in the arena all the time, and yet precious little time is dedicated to training and practice. Any thoughts you want to add to that?
Oh, it is 100%. In sport, you are training, preparing, planning greater than 95% of the time, and you're only performing, somewhere between 1% and 5%. In the business world, you, as Rick said, and as you mentioned there, is you are performing and in the arena around 95% of the time. And you're only training, preparing, planning 5%. Now, you're not going to switch it the other way around. It's impossible in the business world.
Of course.
You cannot flip it. However, how can you move it from 5 to 6%, 6 to 7%? And what is that fine balance? For me, we started a new business in October with a business partner that's going really, really well called Speakers Institute Corporate. Now, I dedicate at the moment 20% of my time on planning preparation, and so that we can perform well. Yeah. But I could easily slip into being about 99% focused on performing right now because we've got new contracts coming through, the business is flowing really quick, but I had to make that conscious decision. If I'm not focusing on that now, so if I'm focusing on being 99% in the game right now, that's only going to be a short-term win. Yes, we might do really well in the first year. However, we're going to see adverse effects long-term. So I need to spend more time than probably what most people would in business to make sure that we can achieve what we're looking for in 10 years' time.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's really, really profound. And I really just want to highlight that point that you made, because I think it speaks to summarizing a few things we've spoken about, and that is it's about that long-term success, about that enduring success, and knowing how to allocate your time right now. There's a book many people on this podcast will know. There's a book that I enjoyed a great deal back in the day. It was called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And at the beginning of the book, he talks about, a couple of fellas that discover a well and they start carrying buckets. And the other guy takes a bit of time to think and plan and builds, a pipe, basically. And I think what you've described so articulately there is the ability to take the time to build that infrastructure, to build that pipe in this instance, so that you have got long-term success. And those guys carrying buckets were obviously had a short-term win, but not a long-term win. And I really like your focus on long-term. So that's a fascinating insight. What I really wanted to ask you about moving forward, Craig, is if you were to think about things you've observed that have made the most difference in your life, business or sports, that you think our audience would really benefit from hearing, remembering that a lot of our audience are practice owners, they're going through that journey of becoming profitable, then scalable, and ultimately having a valuable practice. What sort of things do you think that they might need to focus on as they allocate that time, thinking about that concept? What sort of things are going to allow them in a business sense to enjoy that longer term success?
Excellent. And so something I call CEO periodization. And this has actually come from the sporting world. So for anyone who's been an endurance athlete or who has worked in sport, we'll talk about periodization. Now, what that essentially is, and I'm going to put it in layman's terms, is cycles of workload and stress and then deloading, so recovery. Mm-hmm. So you can't just keep adding because you're going to keep building stress, you're going to keep building pressure, and then you're going to have an atomic bomb moment. Now, I've had one of those, right? So I've been in a situation where I've worked 70 to 80 hours a week for 302 days straight, and I flatlined, right? So my heart gave way in the end. And yes, I enjoyed every single moment and I was loving it to bits and we're doing some incredible things. However, I wasn't looking after myself. And the same thing applies in the business world. And it's what's a little bit different in the business world is, and as a dentist as well, and I admire what you do, the ability to control, or you have to have the ability to control your attention for long periods of time where you're standing still to be able to do your job effectively. Because one wrong move with very tiny instruments inside someone's mouth can have a really bad effect, like the adverse effect. So we need to make sure that we are balancing our workload and our recovery from a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, and career basis. Mm-hmm. Now, I'll take you through those quite simply, is we can only be the top high performers can only actually hold high performance and productivity in the workplace for around about 50 minutes before it starts to decline. Now, if you work on a 3-to-1 work to rest ratio, so say we'll use 45 minutes. So say if you work and you're holding high pressure, you're working on a project or you're doing some dentistry work, if you want to hold that real high level, 45 minutes, then have a 15-minute break. Now, the break doesn't mean that you're going to have a sleep. You could, but it means you need to deload, de-stress from what you were doing. Get up, stand up, walk around, change the conversation, do something that's a little bit different to allow the brain to recover. Now, the reason is, and this is different to an athlete, then most of their fatigue will be physical and they will feel it. So they know when they've got recovery wrong. In the business world, unless you have a highly physical job, it is a psychological fatigue. Now, psychological fatigue is normally so gradual and so slow, we don't recognize what's happening. So as it's declining, the body keeps adapting. So we don't realize what's happening until it's too late. So if you watch a lot of people, if we think about a year, people will work and work and work and work and work, and they'll feel okay. And then they'll take a holiday and they get sick.
Yeah.
Right. So their body's protecting them. The body's adapting to it. But then when you give it recovery, it goes, hey, you know what? You've been punishing me way too long. So I'm going to punish you now. So I'm going to make you sick. And when you feel like you're getting better, I'm actually going to push you back underwater again and hold you down for a bit longer. And then you come back up. So most people spend their whole entire holiday recovering from the year, and they may not even get back to the performance they start at. So what we need to do is work on a 3-to-1 work to rest cycle. So we talked about how we can do that over a day. Now, over a week. Now, I find tradies very good at this.
Yeah.
They will work Monday, Tuesday, and then have a half day off on Wednesday and go play golf.
Yep.
Then they work Thursday, Friday, maybe half a day Saturday.
Yep.
Then they have a day and a half off.
Yeah.
They're doing it quite well. If we look at, and this is an interesting one, and it's not a healthy habit, but if we look at on a daily basis, if we look at someone who smokes and takes a smoko break, they generally take a smoko break once every hour. 45 minutes of working, they walk outside, go have a fag, chat to their friends, recover, probably not, and obviously feel a bit better because of the nicotine, which is probably not, there are some bad sides to it as well, but they're actually doing that. How can you do that over, say, a month, where the first 3 weeks you might have, as a dentist, scheduled lots of appointments, lots of meetings, lots of work, and then you have a week where you maybe schedule less meetings, less work. You may take the afternoons off and go and spend some time with the kids, or you may go do something with your family, and you just let that unwind at the end of the month. And then how do you do that over a year, where you might cycle 3 months that could be fairly full on, and then 1 month that's not so intense? So how can you put things in place? Now, if we look at it from a business point of view, you've got things like Christmas and holidays that can be used as low stress, or they may be high stress to some people, but you've got high stress around when you're doing end of financial year.
Yep.
Or there are certain times a year where it gets really busy. So we can actually plan this in place. So we actually put some recovery around those. So yes, we're allowed to increase stress and pressure. However, we must have a release valve. We must have some recovery downtime to ensure that we can reset again. And then if you're very clever, and I've only seen a couple of people do this effectively. One is a friend of mine called Ann Gripper. She will only take a job for 5 years, and then she has a whole year off. And in those whole years off, she has cycled around Australia once. She has set up a not-for-profit foundation another time. Another time they cycled through South America, and another time she went to Switzerland and studied a master's.
Wow.
Now, it's like having a sabbatical every 5 years, but you've chosen to do it. And there's not many people that do this, but I think if you want to have high performance in either your own business or working in different roles, if you can learn how to balance that over your career, then you're going to be thriving still in your 60s.
I think that's really phenomenal, actually. And the concept of a sabbatical, which I'll come back to in a second because I want to explore a bit more around that, because I think that's actually a bit of a strategy that many people listening to this will really benefit from. But interesting observation around quarterly rhythms in business. And I guess I want to say the word trimester, but I keep thinking pregnancy when I hear trimester. But, thirds, in other words, right? Quarters versus thirds. Interestingly, the business community works in quarters, and we have been doing that for a while. But what my observation was when we do that, people tend to hit that burnout because it's like a long sprint rather than the periods of rest and recovery that you've described. So we actually, interestingly, changed our rhythm to be thirds rather than quarters for that exact reason. It was to work pretty hard for 3 months and then try and have the fourth month to be a little less intense and not holiday, but just take the foot off the pedal a little bit. And so it's really interesting. We were just doing that intuitively, and obviously read a bit about it in sports as well. But I love the fact that you've done it from a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis. And I hadn't even stopped to think about every 5 years having a sabbatical. So I want to just talk about the sabbatical piece for a moment, because there'll be some people listening to this who go, oh, that sounds fantastic, Craig. I can't wait to do it. But they own the business and they're probably worried about stepping out of that business for a while. So from a business owner's point of view, taking a sabbatical, any thoughts on how that could be achieved compared to someone who's in an employment situation and they just change jobs?
Yeah, it's simple. You need to plan it.
Yeah.
It's not something you can leave to chance or haphazard, because if you leave it to chance or haphazard, it's highly likely that you're burnt out and you're having that year off because you're so sick of what you're doing and you've had enough. And what you haven't done is trained other people up to take over and lead it while you're away. Now, if you plan it and you know that in year 6, I'm having a whole year off, you will put things in place to ensure that when you leave, you put trust in your people and they know the roles and can fulfill it without you having to worry about it. You have a full hands-off role and can go do what you like, but you have to plan it. If you don't, you're going to end up in trouble. One, if you leave it to haphazard, then all you're going to do when you're on that year off is think about work. Mm-hmm. You're going to be stressed. So you're actually probably accentuating the problem that got you to that point rather than actually fixing it.
Yeah.
But if you set your attention, right? So I always talk about what is the one intention of where you will focus your attention. And if you focus your attention on something, or if you set an intention to focus your attention, then you will achieve something. Or the percentage of achieving it is so much higher. But if you don't set the intention and you leave it to chance, well, the likelihood of you actually achieving it is very low, very, very low.
Yeah, I love that. That's fantastic. And again, ladies and gents, for those people listening to this particular episode, I'd encourage you to go back and have a listen to that rhythm that Craig articulated, where you do give yourself the opportunity to reset. I think there's a lot of dentists in a perpetual state of burnout. I think there's a lot of business owners, not just dentists, who are in that state as well. And it's because, as Craig has articulately said, we're not giving ourselves the opportunity to take that breather. And as someone who's been through a significant, burnout experience, it's pretty horrible, and I wouldn't wish it upon anyone. I went through that in about 2007, 2008, and never want to go back there again because I just didn't give that space to recover. So learn from what Craig has to say in terms of his wisdom, and also learn from my mistake. And hopefully between my mistake and that wisdom of Craig's, you'll come up with something that works for you. So that would be great.
So something that, and I think would be good to add here right now, is something that I've chosen to do when we set up the new business in October. I said to my business partner, as we were getting it all ready to launch it, I said, my job is to make myself redundant every 3 months. Now, if you go with a redundant mindset of every 3 months as a business owner, you will struggle to get to a burnout phase from boredom or sick of doing monotonous things. And you'll actually take it to a higher level because you set the intention that within 3 months, we're going to build something new out. I'm going to train other people. And then I move on to what is the next thing for the organization, or what is the next thing in dentistry? How can I, maybe after 3 months, how can I do this technique in a different way? So it's challenging you, because it is easy as like an athlete and in dentistry to do something repetitive day in, day out, to fall into that trap of apathy and tiredness and boredom and burnout because you're not enjoying it. And I think it's important to understand there are two ways, there are two kind of streams to burnout. One is you just keep working and working and working and your fuse runs out, or you're actually bored of what you're doing and you're not enjoying it because it's monotonous.
Yeah.
So how do you shift? How do you work both of those two things at the same time? One, through CEO periodization, and two, how do you make yourself redundant so that you can always find something new to step up to and challenge yourself in?
Yeah, love that. That is fantastic. And again, ladies and gents, I hope you've had a pen and paper handy. And if you haven't, please just go back and just recap that last section there, particularly from Craig. Craig, you've been really generous with your time today, mate. I'm very grateful to you. You've obviously got an incredible depth of knowledge and breadth of knowledge as well around performance in all its contexts, whether it's sport, business, or otherwise. And I can see that you've not only lived it yourself, you've been able to transfer that knowledge to others as well and to allow them to create some wonderful results. For people listening to this show and they want to find out more about you, your resources, where would people go to find out more about you and what you do?
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity. So I'm on social media, obviously for business point of view, LinkedIn, very strong there. So if you just search Craig Johns on there, you'll be able to find me. I have a website, craigjohns.com.au. And by the time this gets launched, so Speakers Institute Corporate will be updated as well. So you can see what we're doing there, where I've combined the strengths of a good friend of mine and business partner who's just amazing in the communication, speaking, presentation world, and my background from high performance leadership, well-being, and organizational design. And we have brought those together. And so that the new website will be launching soon.
Fantastic. Well, ladies and gents, I'd really encourage you to avail yourself of those resources. I've had a good look around and there's some wonderful resources and things to read and learn on the website. So please go and do that. And Craig, once again, mate, I really just want to say thank you. It's a really interesting conversation for me about that, the difference between excellent and elite. I really thank you for exploring that gap with us. I really thank you for helping us understand how to close that gap as well. And again, not just in our own personal lives, but how to help other people fulfill their potential as well. So, mate, it's really, really good conversation. So thank you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. And, thank you so much for what you're doing in your community of influence as well within the industry. I think it's important that we continue to progress and push ourselves, not just in our craft and what we're very, very good at, but also the things that can support it and grow your team and your business to be successful, not just in the short term, but in long term. It's around how do we have that enduring success. So yeah, hats off to what you're doing, and it's a pleasure to be on the show.
Thank you, mate. You're a good man. I look forward to catching up soon. And now that we're both in Canberra, we'll be able to go and catch up and have a coffee.
Perfect.
Cheers, mate.
Thank you for listening to the Savvy Dentist podcast with Dr. Jesse Green. For more free tools and resources, join the free Facebook group. Visit drjessegreen.com/Facebook. And for more episodes, visit drjessegreen.com/savvydentist.